Welcome, everyone, and thanks for coming this afternoon. I'm Tim Shriver. I'm going to lead a discussion, I hope, this afternoon. A discussion at the Festival of Ideas that includes an insight about ideas, but is mostly actually about skills and practices. And I think one of the questions I'm going to invite us to ask ourselves is not which ideas most dominate or most animate the lives and changes we want to see, but what skills we need to actually put ideas into action. So we're going to spend a little time today on the shift from ideas to skills, and we're going to do it in the context of the divisiveness in the country. One of my favorite stories about division came from a time when I was doing a tour, and I wrote a book, and I went around to do book events. And so I get to this hotel, and I get in the elevator to go up to the mezzanine where the book event was. And a guy's in the elevator, and he's got a big 10-gallon hat on, and blue jeans, and a big silver belt buckle, cowboy boots. And I push the mezzanine, he looks over at me, and he says, "Anyone ever tell you look like a Kennedy?" And I was on a short ride and sort of distracted and get ready to go. So I said, the door opens. I said, I've heard that before. And he said, well, that must really piss you off, eh? I love the story because there's so much judgment in it. And such natural judgment also. It's not like I hold it against the guy. But there's so many ways in which, in the blink of an eye, look at someone, hat, orange, blue, boots, long hair, short hair. Everybody's synapses are firing, judging. Who's she? Who's he? What they're up to? Who are they? Where are they coming from? What are they good for? The synapses are firing. We judge books by their covers. It's almost involuntary. But at this moment, the premise of this discussion is going to be that's about to destroy us. That impulse, unbridled, is by itself about to destroy us. We're going to talk about the idea that democracy is inherent to the United States, that democracy depends on debate. That's the purpose of democracy, is to invite discussion and debate. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody gets to vote. Everybody is a sacred being, maybe even, in some contexts. But the premise is you have to allow the exchange of opinions, and you can't have the exchange of opinions if the culture is dominated by hatred and contempt. And so we have an existential question in the country that is not about policy issues or about politics or about outcomes. It's about what we will refer to in a minute as contempt. So here's my favorite role model for what we're about here. I had the privilege of seeing Bishop Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died recently, was the great architect of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, Nobel laureate, and importantly, an architect of the truth and reconciliation response in the post-independence South African context. Not the revenge response, not the redivision of wealth or boundaries or other response, but the truth and reconciliation response. Historically, I think unique in world history, that a country would be freed of the shackles of overwhelming oppression, and the new leadership would architect its challenge as truth and reconciliation and healing. So I got to see him give a talk in Davos. This was about 15 years ago. And the question gets up at the end. He says, "Archbishop, you are so happy. You talk about all these wonderful things. Don't you have to admit, look around the world. Look at all the evil. Look at all the carnage. Look at all the oppression. Don't you have to admit that evil is more powerful than good?" And he had this wonderful, I don't know if any of you have seen him on tapes or seen him when he was alive, and he had this sort of glimmer and a glint in his eye. No, he said, no, evil is not more powerful than good, but it is better organized. So the question I want us to sort of work on here for a minute is, and maybe that's what this whole festival is about, how do you get people organized for positive outcomes, right? Not how do you let the negative outcomes dominate just because they're bigger and more powerful and more well-funded, but actually how do you organize an alternative force? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes of background on me. So this is my mom. She was one of 9 children. She was born in the early part of the 20th century together with 8 brothers and sisters. She's most well known, not for anything she did, but for who she was related to. I know the feeling. Stephanie just came up to me and said, "You're so lucky to have a sister named Maria." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." But my mom was most well known because she had a brother who was president of the United States, President Kennedy, and two brothers who were senators and both ran for president, all kinds of other things. And the women and the rest of the family were they were the sisters of, right? Oh, you're the sister of, or I'm the nephew of, and those famous people. But in that same family was a person with an intellectual disability, my Aunt Rosemary. And Rosemary was born before the Supreme Court's decision in Buck v. Bell that allowed the legalized forced sterilization of women in institutions, women with intellectual disabilities in institutions. This is in 1927. The decision was famous for the line Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, which is, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." So the eugenic movement in the United States was very active when my Aunt Rosemary was born, and my mother grew up with a sister that the world hated. I'm going to put it that way. And she loved. So did all of her brothers, by the way, but she took this quite personally and decided early in her life that she knew something to be true that the world didn't see. She didn't have to read a book about it. She didn't have to study. She didn't need to study. She didn't need an analysis of variance to question. She knew that her sister had gifts, right? She knew she enjoyed sailing with her sister. She knew she traveled with her sister when they were in their teen years. They went to Europe together. They had fun. They went to parties. And the world had no school for her, no doctor for her, no job for her, no religious instruction for her, no therapeutic intervention for her, nothing, nothing. My grandmother would say, there was nothing for Rosemary, nothing, nothing, nothing. So my mom in this picture is starting a summer camp. This little boy came from an institution in 1962 in suburban Maryland. And because there was nothing for those children in those institutions, she started a camp. She called it Camp Shriver, and she taught swimming to children with intellectual disabilities in that camp. This is, not to overplay the history, but, at this moment, President Kennedy is downtown. I don't know who he's entertaining or listening to, but he wasn't, in a bathing suit, and he wasn't with a child from an institution in his own backyard pool. She saw this as the critical work of revealing, the organizing for, Bishop Tutu says good, organizing for revealing the dignity of children who had had that dignity denied. I ended up working in the Special Olympics movement, still do, for 25 years. This is my favorite picture. This is Ajara Silla. She's on the award stand. This oath is what became the Special Olympics movement. It was started later in 1968. Now has about 6 million athletes in 190 countries around the world, volunteers and so on. And every time there's 100,000 games a year. So that swimming lesson in 1962 produced a kind of a groundswell of action and motion to allow the dignity of people who are continually denied dignity, the chance to meet and be seen for who they are. Great service models, all run by volunteers. Ann Mora knows this so well. Every competition starts with, let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. And Ajara is here, and sometimes if we had more time, I'd let you just spend time with her in like a minute or two of silence. Because I don't know if you can see, but she's on the 7th. She finished 7th in her race. And you have to ask yourself, is she waiting for anybody's approval? Is she disappointed in who she is or how she finished? Is she comparing herself to someone else who's had a better time? My answer would be none of that. She's done her best. She's given her all. She's beyond needing everybody's approval. Never was offered in the first place. Not a condition for her happiness or contentment. And so you see, again, organizing for good. Here's a role model. Organizing to show us, in at least me, the inner work of freedom. There's political work and freedom, but there's also inner work and freedom. And if she's 12 years old in this picture. So there are ways in which we can organize. I ended up going into the education space, and I won't spend too much time on this, but my mentor was a guy named Jim Comer, who's still teaching at the Yale Child Study Center. And his point was that the problem in schools wasn't time on task and wasn't necessarily the training of social workers or psychologists. It was that teaching and learning is not definable as a transaction between one brain and another, but is instead a relationship, a constructive act of shared meaning-making. So he launched a field that we continue to work on today. I was very proud to be a part of it. Jim launched this field called social and emotional learning. Again, won't spend time on this, but the core dimensions of social and emotional learning are worth noticing because what they're trying to do is we try to teach children self-management and social skills and relationship skills and social awareness and decision-making skills. Why? Because they're the critical building blocks of powerful relationships. And if you want to organize for good, you've got to organize for shared goodness. You can't do it any other way. There is no solitary good, in my view. It just doesn't work that way. So there are these models that came to me, in my life at least, where I start to see, wow, there's one underlying message that comes through all of this. And it's that if we want to organize for good, as Bishop Tutu said we should, we've got to take seriously the work of elevating each other and building the relationships that bring us together. So fast forward to today. If you've gone, I've been to about 4 workshops, 4 sessions so far, and almost everyone has had a diagnostic about what's wrong in the country or in the world right now, which is good. I think that's a good thing. We need a multiplicity of ideas here to challenge us to think about this. Our premise, my premise now, our work, is that we want to isolate this problem into one variable. Audacious, probably narrow, making something that's complex too simple. But the premise here is that, as Arthur Brooks wrote, we have an addiction to contempt. We have normalized what used to be dishonorable. I don't know, did your mothers or fathers ever tell you that hate was a dirty word? Like, I was never allowed to say, I hate my teacher. You can say you don't like your teacher. My mother used to say you can say your teacher has elephant ears. I don't know where she got that one from. But you cannot say in this house you hate your teacher. Or you hate your brother, which was more frequent, by the way. So our premise here is that we have an addiction to contempt. The Gottmans have studied this quite extensively, about 40 years of data on marriages and how contempt works in a marriage. Here's how it works. It destroys a marriage. If your ratio, according to the Gottmans, isn't at least 5-to-1 dignity to contempt, your marriage is likely to fail. So it's not impossible to be contemptuous ever. That's human. But when it becomes normalized, you end up in a culture of contempt. The Gottmans point out that alone will destroy your marriage. The attention to insult and psychologically abuse, you could use your partner. This is in dyads, right? So people say, well, is this just a cultural thing? This actually is powerful in relationships as well. When you treat people with contempt, here's another dimension of this. You think, if I just say, Tammy, you are being such a jerk, such an idiot, so offensive, I think somehow by saying that, I'm going to change her and bring her to my point of view. It doesn't work, right? Contempt almost invariantly backfires. Donna Hicks has done the research on this. The most almost intuitive response to an attack with contempt is the desire for revenge. You almost can't control it. You can regulate it with time and with skill, but you almost can't control it. If I insult your dignity, you almost invariantly want to insult mine. So when you think you're going to talk those Trump voters in to coming around by telling them how stupid, how ignorant, how humiliating, what racist and sexist and how horrible they are, we're operating with a blind spot. It's going to backfire. The current view on this is also that this is not an accident. Matt Taibbi wrote about this several years ago. Kara Swisher's comment at the bottom here is maybe more suggestive, but I think we all know this, but it's worth remembering, as Matt writes, the goal of the media, in the partisan media, is to systematically pry families apart and set group against group. That's the business model. So it shouldn't be a surprise when you feel like when you turn off Fox News or you turn off MSNBC or you turn off talk radio and you're in a state of devotional anger. That's like you just bought the product and that's what they sold you. Why? Because if you're in a state of devotional anger, guess what you do about an hour later? You turn it on again. The storm, like when they said there's a storm coming? It's about 8 hours away. What do? You keep clicking in. Is it coming this way? Is it going to come here? Is it going to come there? Did you check? What's the latest? That's what the media has done to us. It has created this, and as Kara writes down here, the algorithm has seeded isolation, outrage, and addictive behavior. That's the business model. So we shouldn't be surprised that we've become devotionally angry and full of contempt because they're, as one person said, a $2 trillion business trying to do that. So we're like philanthropists and social entrepreneurs and business owners here, but there's a big business out there, and we're all participants in it, that is actually cultivating the contempt that is destroying us. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Here's the bottom line. It's destroying us. About 100, best estimate, about 110 million Americans have ended a relationship within their family or close friends over politics. That means that if in this room there's probably 20 or 30 people who no longer are speaking to someone they either grew up with, are related to, or once loved. And I can say in my family that's happening right now. Right now, we have people ending relationships over politics, which to me is shocking. This makes kids, this is just one of these shocking pieces of data about loneliness and depression. We've seen it so much, but it's worth remembering. When I was in education back in the 80s, I've said this before, that I was responsible for some of the prevention work in our school district, and we reported to the Board of Education in 1989 that up to 20% of our students were at risk of behavioral or mental health disorders. 20%. And people thought it was shocking. And I thought it was shocking. 1 in 5. Today it's 1 in 2. And these statistics kind of become normalized. I'm going to skip this. So here's just a little clip. You can just see how this works. If you're on social media, that's the risk that you're facing every day. If you're not, people you are close to are. And tragically, the people that are most on it are the most vulnerable, the youngest. So this, and the fact that this is fed to you, you just shouldn't be, no one should be surprised by it. I'm going to say one more thing about my family. So I grew up, my dad started the Peace Corps, my mom started Special Olympics. I'm not going to bore you with all that. But here's the one thing that I believed deep in my heart, and that was that no matter what the problem was, I grew up in the civil rights and women's movement and peace movements and related stuff. No matter what the problem was, I was taught that the United States could solve the problem. We could do it. We were unyielding to snark and cynicism. That was the only value that was not American, was cynicism. Americans made thousands of mistakes, but cynicism wasn't one of them. For the first time, about 6 months ago, Pew found that a majority of Americans no longer believe the country can solve its problems. It's the first time it's been more than 50% since it's been measured. So this decline and this arising of contempt I'm going to skip through all this. So you say, well, is this different? This is the end of the lead-in here. Haven't we always had contempt? Hamilton got killed by Burr. People have fought. We fought a civil war. We lost 500,000, 600,000 Americans. We lost 58,000 Americans in the Vietnam War. 2 million people in Southeast Asia died. We've been involved in divisive problems before. I don't think this is the same. I think that the combination of the algorithm, of the constant presence of social media, of the weaponizing of money and power around contempt in politics, of the monetizing of devotional anger in the media, and the decline of religious and civic institutions put us in a position of unique risk. The risk that people become brokenhearted, live in fear, and lose their hope for the future. A great spiritual leader, a woman named Roshi Joan Halifax, said to me about a year ago, she said, the country is grieving, but the thing it's grieving the most is the loss of hope. That's a hard one to beat. You can recover from a lot of things, but I think we can recover from this. So here's the solution. It comes back to what I learned watching my mom in that pool. Donna Hicks, who worked with Bishop Tutu and had worked also on in Northern Ireland in the reconciliation work there, worked with people who had been on the opposite sides of killing each other's family members and the like on the truth and reconciliation work. Her book is called Dignity, and she argues that the way to restore hope and trust is to treat people with dignity. No matter what the wound is, that you can recover from it when you treat people with dignity. Richard Rohr, coming at this much more from the spiritual or psychological point of view, comments that for the planet, for all living beings to move forward, we can rely on nothing less than an inherent original goodness and a universally shared dignity. Dignity has two qualities that are a little bit different from things like respect or civility. These people want more civility, more decency, more calm, cooler heads, all good. Dignity is inherent and it's universal. I can't take it from you. You can't lose it. Nobody doesn't have it. Right? So it's a different quality. A person on death row can be treated with dignity. A newborn baby can be treated with dignity. Everyone can be treated with dignity. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them. We'll get into that a little bit. But dignity is universal and inherent. You don't lose it no matter what you do. And no one else can take it from you. So, again, I'm going to skip some of this. Emmanuel Cleaver said to us when we were working on this and sort of coming around these questions took us a couple of years to get to where we are here. He said, that's fine and well. This is what most politicians say to us, which is that's fine and well. Nobody wins by doing that. Everybody wins by going negative. Everybody wins by scoring high on the metrics for the donor community. If you're getting money, if you want to raise money, you raise money from people who are giving to the environmental issues, the education issues, the reproductive rights issues, war and peace, whatever it is, tax issues. Those people give you money. Nobody gives you money for dignity because nobody measures it. Nobody cares. How do you know if one person's better than the next? So we said, game on. How about a score? So Tammy, would you mind sharing our little dignity index? So we built this tool. This is called the Dignity Index. And we're going to start playing with this in a minute here. But you all you're going to get the 3-minute training, which is mostly sufficient for what it takes to learn the Dignity Index. This is not a complicated tool, but it does invite both a skill and a practice. Okay, not just an idea, but a skill and a practice. So the Dignity Index, let's start in the upper left-hand corner. It focuses on what we say in moments of conflict. It does not focus on facts or policies or positions. It focuses on only one variable: how we treat each other when we disagree. It doesn't tell you whether Trump would be a good president or Biden. It doesn't tell you whether to vote for Schumer or McConnell. It doesn't tell you any of that. It just scores you on how you treat someone when you disagree with them. Now, we've come a long way on this. Our board member, Corinne Neveny, saw a version of this 4 years ago. I just found that out because Ronnie's here. I saw this 4 years ago when we were thinking about the challenge of bringing people together. How do you unite? So we called the not-for-profit we started Unite. The Dignity Index takes this to a far more nuanced level. From 4 down, you see declining levels of dignity and increasing levels of contempt. So a 4 is just, when I talk to you about, and I disagree with you, I'm better than you. I mean, you don't really fit. Your points of view are so bad that you don't really fit. A 3 takes that to a slightly different level. Now, we're the good people. People on the other side are bad. It's us versus them. We're not just in a belonging questionnaire. We're now in an oppositional question. A 2 drops the next level down. You start to hear they're evil. They're out to get us. It's us or them. And a 1 is the language of genocide. We have to destroy them. It's the language of violence. When you get to the 5 and start to go up, the scores will show increasing levels of curiosity and openness and dignity. You go from being curious about what the other person thinks to really want to talk to the other person at a 6, to actually seeing yourself as only making it with other people at a 7. And then in an 8, you're like, I don't care, no matter what you've done, no matter who you are, I see your dignity. I see something in you that I see in myself. Does anyone know that beautiful graduation speech from Howard Thurman, The Sound of the Genuine? Does that ring a bell? I should bring the quote. But he has this beautiful, Howard Thurman, who was a great mentor of Dr. King's. I should put this in this presentation for number 8. This beautiful, he gave the graduation speech at Spelman College, I think about 1960-something, where he writes about when you hear the sound of the genuine, your own genuine sound, that's what makes life worth living. And when you hear it, you can hear the sound of the genuine in someone else, because when you hear the sound of the genuine in one person, you can hear it in anyone. That's an 8. Okay? So the first quiz, not to be divulged and not to be shared with your neighbor, so you can be honest, which is not so easy sometimes. Write a sentence in your mind. If you're a left-wing person or a Biden-type person, fill in the blank that says Trump voters or Trump is, fill in the blank, and then score what you put in. Okay? Or you can look down and look at the scores and fill in which one you think Trump is. And if you're a more conservative voter, fill in the blank by saying Biden is or Biden voters are, and then fill in the blank how you would typically characterize them. So I've done this a couple times, so I know I'm not going to ask you where you land unless you want to volunteer. Does anybody want to volunteer where they land?
I'm at a 5.
You're a 5.
I'm at a 5, a conservative 5.
Yeah? Okay, good. Good, that's good. Anybody else want to? Yeah. Your word is they're dangerous?
They're dangerous.
They're dangerous. That's between a 3 and a 2. Yeah. They're dangerous. Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm a very loving person, and I am humbled to say I'm a 1.
A 1. I was having lunch the other day with a friend of mine. I asked her the question, and she said, well, when it comes to Trump, I'm a 2, but I'm an 8 kind of person. So a 1 is pretty low. It's pretty low. I'm just saying, it's pretty low. Anybody else want to? Yeah.
I think last year I would be a 3 with the Trump voters, but when you do a lot of reading and attending conferences, it would be a 5 too.
A 5. Yeah. Good. So most people are like between a 3 and a 2. So let's play a little bit with this, and you can see how 3s and 2s or 5s and 6s fit. So here are just some sample quotes. The quiz continues, so study hard on your 1 through 8. The first quote is from Leon Mugesera, and he spoke these words during the Rwandan genocide. And the quote at the bottom is from Heinrich Himmler, spoken during the Holocaust. So don't be afraid. Know that anyone whose neck you do not cut will cut yours. Whether you live or starve to death interests me little. How do you score those? Ones. Pretty straightforward. They're not even human. It's our moral duty to destroy them. Now, if you think to yourself, as I do after doing this work for a while, that our country is about a 2-3, generally speaking, when it comes to politics, we're a hair's breadth above this language. So when people respond violently, we should not be surprised if we use this kind of language. Amanda Ripley has written beautifully about this. This language incites violence, not just one language, but 2 and 3 language, stimulates the desire to be violent. So it's not simply your own kind of private language when you say they're horrible, they're demonic, they're just disgusting human beings. Don't be surprised when someone picks up a gun and either tries to shoot you or shoot someone else. The language itself contributes to the explosion of violence. All right, here's Mrs. Clinton. No bias here. By the way, I should have said this scale has been normed and validated over a 2-year period, so we can score objectively regardless of what political party you're from. So here's Mrs. Clinton. Many of you will remember this quote. Just to be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump supporters in what I call the basket of deplorables, right? Corinne, will you read the rest of this?
Unfortunately, there are people like that. And he has lifted them up. He has given voice to their websites that used to have only 11,000 people. Now they have 11 million. He tweets and retweets their offensive, hateful, mean-spirited rhetoric. Now some of those folks, they are irredeemable, but thankfully they are not America.
How do you score it? Anybody else? So we give this a 3. The reason you don't give it a 2 or a 1 is there's no call to destruction. They're close to evil. I would say it's a low 3. But they're not evil. They're just deplorable. They're bad. Right? So you can see here the 3. Now, one of the interesting things about this quote, and I don't mean to pick on Mrs. Clinton. That's not the point here. But this quote became quite famous, and it maybe hurt her in the election. Who knows? I'm not smart enough to know. But it became quite a characterization of her as a candidate. And when she wrote her book, she said, when I said these words, I don't know if anybody read it, everybody attacked me, but she said, it's true. And then she cited data. And she had polling data and self-reported data that showed all these characteristics were true of Trump supporters. So this is one of the common responses to the question around contempt. Well, what if it's true? Why shouldn't I? So the Dignity Index doesn't tell you whether it's true or not. It just tells you how you're characterizing people, right? It just tells you, are you demonizing people? Are you alarming people to get your supporters? Are you getting more or less contempt at the end of the day? And the truth, I'm sorry to say, of the impact of this kind of speech is that it doesn't work, right? You can cite all the research to say it's true, but what happens to those people when you treat them that way? Guess what happens? Hardening, increased anger, no movement. A politician's supposed to try to be winning votes. This is a guaranteed strategy for ensuring that you have revenge on the minds of people you're trying to convince. All right, we're going to play a little bit more. This is John McCain. Any volunteer readers? Come on, big. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks. Will you?
We keep trying to find a way to win without help from across the aisle. What we have to lose by trying to work together to find, or what do we have to lose to work together to find those solutions? We're not getting much done apart. I don't think any of us feels very proud of our incapacity. Merely preventing your political opponents from doing what they want isn't the most inspiring work. There's greater satisfaction in respecting our differences, but not letting them prevent agreements, made in good faith that help improve lives and protect the American people. The Senate is capable of that. We know that. We've seen it before. I've seen it happen many times. And the times when I was involved, even in a modest way, with working out a bipartisan response to a national problem or threat, are the proudest moments of my career and by far the most satisfying.
Well, you read beautifully. Okay, so now this is not an obvious one. Take a look at your scorecards here and see if you can take a guess as to where you'd score this one. 6? See how quick you can learn? This is a 6. There's an invitational openness to collaboration. He's not saying he's in love with the other people. He's not saying he agrees with them, but he's expressing this openness to the other side. We're searching. I want to work together. It's actually better when we work together, right? Okay, one more. Last volunteer reader. Yeah, will you read for us? I should say this is, I don't know why we took the names off. This is a quote from Archbishop Tutu. Yes, mine right up front.
I have sat with condemned men on death row. I have spoken with former police officers who have admitted inflicting the cruelest torture. I have visited child soldiers who have committed acts of nauseating depravity, and I have recognized in each of them a depth of humanity that was a mirror of my own.
So you notice no forgiveness, no condoning the action. Not saying acts of nauseating depravity are okay. Not saying that was a good idea. But noticing even in those people a kind of a common humanity. That's an 8. And that's actually not as rare as you might think. Most people in this room will speak with 8 languages, my guess is at some point in the next day or two, to someone. You won't use it all the time, but we're all capable of it. This is the point. So here's what we're trying to do. We started this effort to use this dignity index. This is the inaugural chapter of Students for Dignity, which we started at the University of Utah a year and a half ago. And 3 or 4 of these students have graduated and are now working full-time on organizing dignity index kind of programs on campuses around the country, every place from Drake to the University of Wisconsin to Spelman to Morehouse to Brigham Young to Pennsylvania and a bunch of other places. I'm forgetting a few, where young people are sort of saying, I want to actually figure out how to do this because I hate living in the culture that is so divisive and so scary. This is the scoring guide, which we're using now that actually, if you wanted to stay for 3 hours, we would be able to dive into the nuances of the different scores. The people interested in the scoring guide are actually businesses. We're beginning to train large corporations, workforce, because businesses are saying, we want to be able to incorporate this kind of culture, teamwork, respect for differences into our workplace, and this seems like a pretty easy way to actually do it kind of quickly. So this is kind of like you just see that there's a detail like a 4. You start to really understand the difference between a 4 and a 3 and start to really see yourself and the differences between the 4 and a 3. So,
are you just going to keep going?
Okay, here's a couple of examples.
I want to answer my question.
You know what? I kind of feel like I need to go to break right now.
No, let me go.
Maybe.
No, she's ready to answer the
question. Because I can't hear anybody saying anything.
It's hard when you're being interrupted.
I know. So maybe we need to just figure out how we do this again. Let's have this break and let's figure out how we're going to make this work. We'll be right back.
Score whoopee while we're going to the next one. These come quickly. So you have to score these in your mind's eye, and we'll come back to this.
And I want to personally thank Caitlin Clark for lifting up our sport. She carried a heavy load for our sport. So Caitlin Clark, if you're out there, You are one of the GOATs of our games, and we appreciate you.
That's the opposing coach, if you don't know that. Yeah.
When someone presents you with something, quite often, I think the average person, myself included, gets offended and brings up our own self-righteousness. And I need to now prove that I'm right and you're wrong.
You should be able to understand where other people are coming from without fully agreeing with them. And you should be able to understand that people can arrive at different conclusions because of their own life experiences.
The starting point is curiosity. If you preach at someone, they might be defensive. If you come to them with non-judgmental curiosity, just trying to learn, they open up their hearts and their minds to you and they give it to you.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my way of thinking is incorrect. I think it's pretty polarizing. When I talk about this, it upsets a lot of people. So maybe my worldview was wrong and maybe yours is right.
So heated.
Yeah, where it looks like you caught Big Red off guard a little bit.
As he said, I got him with a cheap shot.
You know what? He just wants to be on the field and he wants to play. And so there's nobody I get better than I get him. He's a competitive kid, and he loves to play, and he makes me feel young.
I wasn't sure how I was going to feel in court and seeing him, but honestly, seeing him, my heart just breaks for him. He has a wife sitting behind him. He has a family sitting behind him, and his life is turned upside down from all of this too.
The last one is one of those ones where, we see that kind of forgiveness rarely in the world. But it's so, at least to me, I've seen that clip a dozen times. It still moves me. Anyway, we just show you these just to give you a sense of the options, right? And that there are role models for these options all around us. It's not as though we're stuck. Like, I think there's this perception that there's nothing we can do about the contempt in the culture. There's nothing we can do. Their forces are too big. But actually, there is, the premise here is that good practices are potentially ours. Here's an example of how blind we often are and why the dignity index is so powerful for people. This is President Biden in the same speech. In the same speech. They thrive on chaos. They live not in the light of truth. They're in the shadow of lies. MAGA Republicans are committed to destroying American democracy. And America guarantees that everybody is treated with dignity. Right? So we don't think anything of this. Oh, we think that was a great speech. And the reason is we don't often see our own contempt. Contempt operates by disguise. The way we say it is, it's hard to see contempt when you use it. Why? Because it hides under self-righteousness. They deserve it. I'm being contemptuous in defense of my values. I have to, the way I'm speaking about them, that's what we have to do to stop the oppression or to stop the madness or to stop the defense, whatever it is. I don't hear, as one woman said to me, up until now, I hated hateful people. She didn't hear it. She didn't hear it. It's like she didn't hear that she'd become hateful. She'd become hateful as a way of opposing hate. The president, I'm not picking on him either, doesn't see it. Right? So it's hard to see contempt when you use it. It's hard to use it once you see it. So the reason I think we're getting such interest, not so much in journalists and politicians, which is where we need it, that's the grass top strategy, but from businesses and students and young people, is because they intuitively see it and they want to change. Right? They want to change. So there's a lot of this work going on. You see on the back of your card, these are sort of basic skills, like if you're in the midst of a contemptuous relationship, or if you're in the midst of a heated debate, try to regulate before you debate. The contemplatives of almost every religion have been teaching this for somewhere around 6,000 to 8,000 years of recorded history. Pause, drop down, find another zone, find another gear, how to express curiosity instead of being furious. That's a 6th grade lesson we teach in the social emotional learning world, how to be curious, not furious, not that hard to remember even. Listening skills, fundamental to how you learn. And you see these on the back of your card, so I won't spend too much time on them. Just to let you know that schools are very interested in this. If you look over here, I'm going to come out of the zone, this little sign here, this is the Salt Lake City School District moniker, which is 5 and up, meaning they're trying to create a code of conduct that invites children and teachers only to use 5 and up, no contempt language. Only the lowest way you characterize someone is with a 5. So they've built these hand signs around the country, and school boards are supporting this, and we're doing lots more work around this, and all the things the kids pass out. I'm going to skip this for a second. Just to let you know, politicians are not as bad as we think. This is Spencer Cox, the Republican governor of Utah, in the lower part of this, and in the right is Governor Wes Moore of Maryland, who I think is here, if not here, coming. The panel here up above with Governor Cox and Donna Brazile and Ruth Okediji and others. These two men disagree on almost every single policy issue. Almost every policy issue. On taxes, I shouldn't say everyone. Service they agree on. Refugee issues they agree on. But many, many issues they disagree on. And they treat each other like brothers. So even at the higher ranks of political office, this is not impossible. In fact, many, many good politicians, and I'm sure many people in this room know good members of Congress, members of the Senate, State House, local elected officials, mayors, city council people, who are really decent people and treat others with respect. And guess what? They get no play. You don't hear about them. But do you hear about Lauren Boebert? Do you hear about all that language? Of course, that's what we hear about, which is the problem. So it's just to say that we're working with governors around the country and think we can actually make some progress here. Here's a short clip. Okay, can we stop that for 1 second?
When you face
Hold on, I can stop it. I know how to do this. What I'm going to show you, does anyone know Frank Luntz? Frank Luntz, the pollster who tracks responses to content, as a piece in today's New York Times, tracks responses to content in real time. So he wires people, Republicans, Democrats. This is an ad from the Republican governor of Vermont, one of the bluest states in the country, and the most popular governor in the country today is the Republican governor of the very blue state of Vermont. This is his ad, and watch the lines, Republicans and Democrats, and you can get a sense of the responsiveness here.
When you face a disagreement, you can bring your points up, but you really should be listening to what are their points, what are their fears, why do they feel the way they do, and I think there's a way to get through that. Maybe learn something yourself. Maybe they will learn from you if you're calm and give a good argument instead of an emotional argument. If you still get to a point where you can't agree, that's okay. It's okay not to agree on every issue. It's okay not to win every issue. And hopefully you have that respect, mutual respect, so you can have those conversations. It's never too late to be a better person. It's never too late to be kind. It's never too late to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand what they're going through. And just be better people and lead by example. Together, we can disagree better.
So you see the numbers, 80s to 70s. So when people say politicians can't win, it's just not true. By showing dignity, it's just not true. It's just not true. You can win with dignity. People say this stuff is too soft to matter. The ratings for these ads are off the charts. Millions of views. So people say, well, you can't make content like this. I said, what about Ted Lasso? Of course you can. Of course you can. Of course we can. So I'm going to stop there and just invite, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. No, we don't have any time left. I talk too much. Questions, or just share quick reactions, thoughts, things that don't make sense in a sentence or two, things that make sense. Yes.
Has anybody from the big tech sector contacted you about this idea or framework?
No. We talked a little bit to Microsoft early on about the AI tool, and we have an AI tool that will allow us to do this in real time, including like a drop-down box where you could type in, Tim was a lousy speaker and I think he's a fool, and then have a drop-down box say, I didn't agree with Tim, but he's a nice man, as an alternative. So we're building that stuff with support from, but big tech, I don't want to say they have not contacted us. I don't think there's much difference of opinion that the algorithm is a problem. I don't think they're demonic. I just think it's a problem. And I just think we have to equip, one of the things we've talked about here is equipping end consumers to put it on their, put like a filter on their search engines, to put a filter on their social feeds so that they would block out. Like you could block out for your kids X-rated movies in the old days, or MM, whatever it's called now. You could block out of your own feed 2s and 1s. Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to come from them. It's going to have to come from us, in my view. Yes.
Tim, I'm struck that at least I can only speak for myself, that I have the capacity to have all these numbers within me at different moments in time. And it's helpful for me to see this and to think about maybe where I am. But I would like to ask you from an historic perspective, when you think about, let's just say, the Judeo-Christian tradition, there seem to be different moments when at least a select group of people thought that these different numbers were appropriate for what they were dealing with. Yeah. So if we think of the prophets, if we think of... And so I wonder kind of what your response is first to kind of prayerful thinking about the fact that we have all these numbers within us, what to do about that, and then what would you say to, just say, the certain activists and certain people who are living in the prophetic tradition who are experiencing significant pain, and feel that it would be a disservice if we didn't say that something was truly evil? Yeah.
So that's the 1 minute answer you want? I'll do short answers. First of all, we don't say that contempt is never needed. You might say that in World War II it was necessary to destroy Hitler and his army. But immediately after that war, we rebuilt Germany. And we have a 75-year alliance and a robust democracy and a thriving economy to show for it. We didn't punish the German people. We could have. A lot of people might have wanted to, same with Japan. So targeted contempt is maybe necessary in life. Certainly in moments of violence and risk, we don't suggest you just walk around with a hair shirt on and a flower in your ear. That's number one. Number two, the question on oppression, and this is not a recommendation for accommodation to oppression. The only question that the index invites us to ask is, what's the best strategy for defeating oppression? No one would say, oh, you're being oppressed, just be nice. This is not a be nice strategy. This is stand up for all your principles with all the force and power and heart you've got, and add one principle. Treat the person you oppose with dignity. No compromise on right and wrong, justice, injustice, oppression. So that's number two. Number three, I would say in the religious tradition, my oversimplified theology is that there's two powerful veins in religion. One is what I'd call the good-bad vein, and the other is the unity and division vein. Most people who are unity and division, religious people, will sacrifice bad behavior for the sake of unity. Most people who are good and bad people in religion will sacrifice unity for the sake of good behavior. They're not completely separate, but the prevalence or the priority one places the factor load. So if you're like in the contemplative tradition, you're very much a unity division type person, and you think to yourself, well, people violate the law, it's okay. People cross the border, it's okay. They need help, it's okay. If you're on the other side, you think to yourself, that's morally, that's illegal. It's a crime. In defense of God, I have to do things that bring out the goodness. So I don't think religion answers the questions for us. We just have to notice that in most religious traditions, I mean, I was looking at the 99 names of Allah, they're almost all merciful, forgiving, beneficent, loving, compassionate. In Islam, you have the same thing. In Judaism, of course, you have the bellicose language, and then you have the beautiful, forgiving language. I put before you life and death, choose life. The Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. So, sadly, I don't think religion will answer for us, but I think there are great practices in religious traditions, if we looked for them, that would help us do better. Yeah. I mean, are we chased out or, yeah, kind of? Okay, kind of. Last question. I'm sorry I've talked so long.
Sorry. I just was curious, maybe with the college students you're working with, are there specific activities or ways of engaging with people in a more in-depth way that you've seen have the highest percentage of actual behavior change?
Yeah. So we're working on that. We're doing dignity debates, practicing, like people on reproductive rights, for instance, which is always hot, particularly on college campuses. Getting kids to have these discussions and try to figure out how to have the conversations just in sort of small groups that are safe. We've talked about dignity service projects, getting people from different sides of political structures to, let's say, do a homeless thing or do a environmental project or some other kind of service project. So social media posts, we're about to launch the Dignity Daily, which will have like a Wordle-like effect that the kids really like, where you can test yourself, get one every day, get a score every day, and you can get a quote every day, and you can try to score yourself and see, like just with Wordle, how well you do. So the young people are building these kinds of exercises up. The real pivoting experience has been, I know we're done. I know, I'm getting the hook. The real pivot experience, honestly, has been just learning the index. That's what people really seem to like. They look at it, and they find themselves drawn into a new conversation with themselves sometimes with their moms, their dads, their brothers, sisters. And I thank you all for joining me and hope we can continue these discussions.